3 Mile Island, Unit 2, March 28, 1979. The eyes of the whole world are riveted on this rural backwater in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Danger is in the air. We are all frightened. Rumor and fact are indistinguishable, despite decades of educational public relations.
A reactor is simply a furnace which safely, cheaply, and cleanly heats water to make steam.
Meltdown, hydrogen explosion, China syndrome, evacuation, radiation. 100,000 people have already fled the area.
Nuclear reactions in this radioactive uranium fuel core here heats the water pumping round in this primary loop here. This heat is absorbed by the water pumping in this secondary loop where it turns to steam, producing abundant electricity from nuclear energy.
In the end, all that remains at 3 Mile Island Unit 2 is a brooding hulk filled with radioactive poisons, a bill for $3,000 million, and a cauldron of unanswered questions.
The nuclear part of the power plant is safely enclosed in this 4-foot-thick concrete containment.
Investigators, of course, went over the accident, probing, questioning, analyzing. And many of these investigators are said to have been surprised, shocked, and dismayed as they uncovered the extraordinary story of a nuclear power system which failed. Why did the investigators, through their hearings, arrive at such a conclusion? And why did they find the nuclear system, the manufacturers, the federal regulators, the plant managers lacking? Here, Nova has reconstructed and dramatized a hearing into the accident at 3 Mile Island, based on the records of the official investigations. Witnesses, representing those involved, will be questioned by a chairman, while we are the two presenters of the program. Our job is to comment on the proceedings and interpret the significance behind the testimony as described in the investigation's reports. I myself will also question certain witnesses, both about events which happened before the accident and about events which happened away from the 3 Mile Island plant. Here we will expose the startling events of the accident itself and the role of a nuclear power system which the reports conclude made the crisis at 3 Mile Island eventually inevitable. Here now is a view of that system, that crisis, and those events, based on the transcripts and reports of the President's Commission, the Rogovin Special Inquiry, and the House and Senate investigations. The actors assembled here will not necessarily speak the words that were spoken before the many hearings, but the characters they play will represent compilations of many witnesses and will provide information based on testimony. This is the chairman of our hearing. He will question our 3 Mile Island operators about the actual events of the accident from the very first seconds. These are our representatives of the nuclear system, our manufacturer, our Nuclear Regulatory Commission, our 3 Mile Island management. Mr. Chairman, are you ready? So, we now reconstruct the events of March 28, 1979. An uneventful shift for the operators in their windowless control room where, unable to see inside the plant, they operate remotely, trusting in their instruments meters, and switches. When?
The alarm starts sounding.
1 second into the accident.
The pumps trip into secondary.
2 seconds.
The turbine trips.
3 seconds.
The pressure builds up.
The pour valve opens.
8.
The reactor scrams.
It's 9 seconds into the accident.
Now, wait. You have to go slower. We're trying to understand this event. Now, please start again. This is too important to rush. Now, go back to the alarms.
But before we go back, let us take a quick look at the working of a nuclear power plant. Within the 4-foot-thick concrete safety containment, there is the 100-ton uranium fuel core, the furnace, in which nuclear reactions create heat. Water pumping in the primary loop through the fuel core collects this heat and transfers it to water pumping round the secondary loop, the non-nuclear side, where water turns to steam to drive a turbine and an electric generator. This is the PORV, a pressure relief valve in the primary loop.
Please start again. This is too important to rush.
Yes. The alarms started sounding and I looked up to see what was wrong.
1 second into the accident.
The pumps tripped in the secondary loop.
Shut themselves down automatically, stopping the circulation.
2 seconds.
Pressure rises in the primary loop.
That's normal.
3 seconds.
The pour opens automatically.
That's the pressure relief valve in a primary loop, the PORV. It's opening to relieve the pressure.
The backup pumps kicked on in the secondary loop.
As they should to restart the circulation.
4 seconds in.
And here's the first problem. It's true, those backup pumps kicked on, but they didn't replace anything.
Those backup pumps have been isolated by a valve. They're disconnected from the system.
While the operators think the backup pumps are doing their job, in fact, the backup pumps are pumping with nothing to pump. And the operators operate under their first misconception.
The reactor scrams.
The nuclear furnace shuts itself down, stopping the nuclear reactions in the fuel core.
The pressure falls.
The PORV closes shut.
That's automatic.
The PORV light goes out. That tells us it's closed.
The PORV has closed.
The PORV hasn't closed. The PORV light going out is false information. But of course, they had no way of knowing that. They've only got their instruments to go on.
Of course. So when that light went out, it left the operators in the dark, with their second misconception.
What's more, with that PORV stuck open, there's a hole in the primary system.
Yes, through that hole, steam will gush out, steam from the primary coolant water.
A loss of coolant accident. A leak in the primary.
A loss of coolant accident, an LOCA, a LOCA, one of the most dangerous plant accidents and one of the most feared. For an accident in a nuclear plant can be extremely dangerous, even after the nuclear reaction is stopped.
Yes, but we should say that the plant, it can't explode like a nuclear bomb.
No. But even after the nuclear reaction is stopped, if steam and water coolant leak out of the primary, the radioactive fuel core will uncover. It will then spontaneously warm up, heat up, get hotter, and start heading for meltdown.
Because of the leak. Because of the LOCA. You see, even though there's no nuclear reaction, the coolant water must cover the core. It's essential for safety. If the core uncovers, the exposed radioactive fuel will spontaneously warm up and heat up, and with nothing to cool it, at about 4,000 or 5,000 degrees, the 100 tons of radioactive fuel will melt, become a molten mass, and will start dissolving itself out of the plant. That's meltdown.
Some projections say that a worst-case meltdown could crack open a plant and throw tons of radioactive materials into the air, causing thousands of radiation deaths and tens of thousands of cancers, and contaminate huge areas.
Which brings us back to 3 Mile Island.
where we already have backup pumps cut off,
In the secondary.
which should not be cut off, and a pore stuck open,
In the primary.
which should not be open, and a loss of coolant accident, a LOCA in progress, and nobody knows about any of this.
Projections tell us that this leak, this developing LOCA, if unarrested, will lead to a meltdown within 3 hours and 22 minutes.
Yet you were still not concerned.
Of course. Well, yes, but at the time it was not clear.
You see, with all these alarms flashing from both sides,
How many alarms?
many alarms,
Well, 20, 30?
100 or more alarms.
the control panel started to look like a Christmas tree.
All those colored lights, flashing lights.
So you were overwhelmed, losing control.
No, it wasn't like that. No. It's always like that with the lights and the alarms during a transient.
The atmosphere in the control room was
Calm. Business-like, calm. We had confidence in the safety of the system. It worked automatically with many duplicate, even triplicate safety features. It was designed that way. Our job was to follow procedures. The procedures were laid out in the manual. If something should go wrong, we verify and adjust, fine-tune the system.
2 minutes into the accident. 3 hours, 20 minutes to meltdown.
And then the emergency injection water comes on in the primary.
emergency injection water. You're in an emergency?
No. It's a safety device.
You see, we've been having this emergency water come on at the plant during various transients. It's no big deal.
That's right. It's no big deal.
But in fact, the emergency water injection is designed to come on when a leak occurs. It injects water into the primary to compensate for the leak.
But it's come on too many times when there's been no LOCA, when there's been no leak.
So this time the cry fails to alarm.
Now, the water level in the primary, it's rising too fast, and it's not clear why.
This is unusual. This is weird.
The water, it's going too high, while the pressure is going down.
See, water level up, water pressure down. We'd never seen anything like it. We couldn't figure it out.
But didn't you have any idea why that was happening?
Well, we still had the emergency water injection pouring in.
All right, now what are you going to do about it?
We just cut the injection.
You cut the emergency water?
We didn't need the water.
I just stepped to my left, pushed 6 bypass buttons, and cut most of the injection going into the system.
Confused by the history of the emergency water injection, which had come on too often when it shouldn't have come on,
Not knowing they had a leak, a LOCA, that's running towards meltdown, they do exactly what they shouldn't do.
they cut the emergency injection.
They cut the compensating water.
Out the pore and down the drain, heading for a meltdown.
4.5 minutes into the accident.
Did the water level stop rising now?
No, it didn't.
Filled right up, went solid. We couldn't stop it.
Now that it's solid, both steam and water shoot out of the stuck-open pore.
And still, they know nothing about this LOCA.
8 minutes into the accident. 3 hours, 14 minutes to meltdown.
And then I noticed that the 12s were closed.
The 12s?
The 12s, cutoff valves on the backup pumps. I was going all through the secondary because it's sitting there dry, and this yellow maintenance tag is hanging down over the indicator light on one of the 12s. So I yell out, "The 12s are closed!" And everyone comes around, and then we knew why the secondary was going dry.
Right away, we snapped open the 12s to get the secondary back in business.
We get water back in the secondary, restart the circulation.
But why didn't you know that these cut-off 12s were closed earlier?
Well, you see, this yellow maintenance tag was covering one of the lights. There are always tags like that all over the place.
So you never noticed that this valve was closed because the light was covered by a tag?
No, sir.
Well, what about the other 12? Was this light covered by a yellow tag too?
No, sir.
Well, why didn't you notice that that one was closed?
I don't know, sir.
It's not clear, sir.
Well, why the hell were these 12s closed in the first place? These were cut-off valves.
I don't know, sir.
We don't know, sir.
Even we don't know. All we really know is that both those valves had been closed 2 days earlier during a test of the pumps. The test was conducted while the plant was running, which is in keeping with normal company procedures, but which nevertheless puts the company in violation of its federal license.
Still, looking on the bright side, the operators had found the closed 12s and opened them. They fixed the trouble on the secondary side. They'd gotten on the right track.
They thought.
Well, they were starting to turn it around.
They thought.
Well, 15 minutes into the accident, 3 hours, 7 minutes to meltdown.
And the locust still going on. All that water and steam pouring out of the pore. There must be 3,000 gallons already. Where's it all going?
It's pouring into a drain tank, which overflows into the containment sump. But of course, the operators, they can't see inside the plant.
No alarms go off? No instrument tells of the problem?
Well, yes, alarms do go off, but those alarms you see are on the back side of the control console, out of sight.
And the operators don't see them?
No. In a crisis, that console leaves a lot to be desired.
Then we punched up a reading of the pour of discharge temperature.
Routinely. It's a routine procedure just to check that the pore hasn't stuck open. If it had, the discharge temperatures would be very high because of the hot water or steam passing through it.
What did you find?
Fairly high, but fairly normal.
How could it be both normal and high?
He means you should understand one thing. We were used to high temperatures off that pore valve.
Why was that?
It was a leaky pore, so the normal temperature was normally high.
In fact, that pore had been leaking for how long?
6 months. Leaking enough that regulations specified that it be attended to or its backup valve closed.
And did the utility follow regulations?
No. They were later fined $155,000.
For what?
For various violations, including not attending to that leaky old pore, and the Justice Department was asked to investigate whether the company knew that the pore was leaking beyond technical specifications and had doctored the measurements.
And it's 25 minutes into the accident, while the operators work along with yet another misconception.
But why is this happening? These operators, these errors, they're not dumb, they're...
Just the most visible people in the accident. Behind the scenes are the manufacturer, the regulator, and 3 Mile Island management. It is time for me to question them about the background to the accident.
Manufacturer.
Yes, sir. We built the nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island.
Did your company also build the reactor at the Davis-Besse plant in Ohio?
Yes, sir.
Is it not true that in September 1977, 1.5 years before the 3 Mile Island accident, the pore stuck open at the Davis-Besse plant in Ohio?
Yes, a minor transient in which they...
Which raised the water level indicator and misled the operators into turning off the emergency injection supply.
Yes, but...
Just as it later happened at 3 Mile Island.
Yes, there were some similarities. But at David-Besse, they diagnosed the situation. And then within 21 minutes responded successfully to a simple mechanical failure.
But did you do anything to prevent such a thing from happening again?
Yes, after 3 Mile Island.
Oh, no, we're not talking about after 3 Mile Island. We're talking about after Davis-Besse. 1.5 years before 3 Mile Island. What actions did you take in those 18 months?
That particular problem at David-Besse seemed unique to that plant and to that pore. In our best judgment, it wasn't necessary to inform the other plants.
Not necessary to inform the other plants? Like 3 Mile Island? Well, who did spread the news?
Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Yes, licensing, regulating. Our job is to oversee the entire industry.
And you are responsible for regulating the safety of nuclear plants?
Yes, that's part of our job.
After you analyzed the accident at Davis-Besse, did you then circulate a report warning of problems with stuck-open pores and misleading water levels?
We reported it in the Gray Book.
Gray Book.
New Reg 0020. It's known as the Gray Book. We record all incidents there.
But the utility companies, the manufacturers, the plant operators, did you put the nuclear power industry on notice of the potential dangers inscribed in your report?
Well, no.
How can that be?
We had no department charged solely with that task. You see...
But weren't you all, every single department, every single person, charged with protecting public health and safety?
Yes, I suppose so.
Thank you.
Manufacturer.
How many times before 3 Mile Island had pores stuck open at your reactors?
9 times, I believe.
9 times. Out of how many openings?
About 150.
9 times, 6% of all openings. It stuck open once every 17 times it was supposed to work. Wouldn't you say that that pore has a significant problem?
You can't expect valves like that to operate 100%.
Did you later agree to pay a fine of $100,000 for not having
An effective system for the collection, review, evaluation, and reporting of important safety information about your plant?
Yes, but...
Thank you.
Management.
It was not a serious incident.
Nonetheless, is it not true that almost exactly a year before the present accident, a pore stuck open right there at 3 Mile Island?
Yes.
Did it then cause a LOCA just as it did 1 year later?
Yes.
Did the reactor scram and the emergency water injection kick on?
There was a similar series of events, yes.
Did you at that time have any indicator light to show if the pore were open?
No. It was after that transient that we put in a pore light.
After your operators had requested one.
But what kind of pore light did you put in?
One that went on when the pore was instructed to open.
Did not your operators request a light that would show if the pore were actually open or closed, not whether it was supposed to be open or closed?
Well, if you understood the pore, this was an enclosed valve. It would have been very difficult to physically install an actual position light, and weighing the different advantages of each.
In other words, it came down to time and money. Thank you. So, what do you think of what these people have said?
They seem to raise more questions than they answer. Really, it's not simply operator error that caused 3 Mile Island.
45 minutes into the accident.
2 hours, 37 minutes to meltdown.
We were going through procedures, trying to see what would fit.
What seemed most puzzling?
Water level's still up and the water pressure's still down. And we couldn't work out why the system had gone solid. Still, it wasn't so bad. It had stabilized, holding steady. Nothing more serious had happened.
Well, what did you imagine had happened then?
Well, that there was a breach of some kind. Nothing serious, something like a steam line breach.
You were wondering about a steam line breach. Did you also wonder if you could have had a loss of coolant accident, a leak in the primary?
A LOCA? Well, the primary was solid, wasn't it? Full. There was too much water.
And the manual says for a LOCA, you get a rapid continuing decrease of pressure. Sure, the pressure was low, but it wasn't getting any lower.
Then there's a radiation alarm, the HPR 227. The procedures say that alarm goes off for a LOCA. It's a unique sign.
It didn't go off. Now, if you're leaking from the primary, a LOCA, you're leaking radioactivity, and you're going to set off that alarm, right? Well, there's no alarm, so there's no LOCA.
What is wrong with that HPR 227? Isn't there enough radioactivity slurping around to set it off?
Of course. But there are 2 possible explanations, and they both would seem ludicrous if they weren't so serious. The 227 could have been simply misset. Even a very slight miscalibration could throw that instrument off.
What is the other possibility?
Water seeping into the instrument could have blocked out the reading.
Even though the 227 is there to detect a LOCA, a leak, where you would expect to find hot water and steam, it doesn't seem to have been built to deal with water.
And the operators say they're depending on this as a unique sign of a LOCA.
Well, the operators are pushing that a little. There are other signs. But it's not hard to understand their misunderstanding if you read those emergency manuals.
Procedure 2202-1.5. Well, this seems to say, translating, that a failed pore is a symptom of pore failure. Yes, I would say that misunderstanding is quite understandable.
Except that their training is designed to make it possible to understand the procedures and interpret what is actually going on, is it not?
Let's have a look at the training. Training, training. Who's got the training? The utility is legally responsible, but they don't have adequate expertise or simulator facilities. So they contract out to the manufacturer. The manufacturer has the expertise and the simulators, but they're not actually accountable for the performance of the operators. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is ultimately responsible for the licensing of the operators, but they only give the final exam. Manufacturer.
Our training is aimed at providing the operators with the skills and the knowledge to responsibly manage the operation of a nuclear plant.
What about analysis? Did you train your operators to analyze the misleading situation of, for example, a rising water level in a system that is actually losing water?
Our program is aimed to prepare the operators to manage the plant and to use available information.
But were those operators ever trained to read that water level as anything other than an indication of how full the system was?
Gee, I think a lot of people have asked that question.
The operators weren't trained to deal with multiple failure accidents, to diagnose new situations, or to respond to the unexpected. The simulators weren't programmed to simulate the consequences of a stuck-open pour. While if you tried to go solid, the simulator just clear the board.
End of game.
Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Yes, we gave the tests, the qualifying tests for the operators' licenses.
What guidelines did you set up for the trainees and the training programs?
We didn't give training courses or select trainees.
Well, what were your requirements for those who did? The utilities, the manufacturers?
You have to understand, we didn't impose any specific requirements.
What qualifications did you set for the instructors?
That was the responsibility of the utilities.
1 hour in, 2 hours, 22 minutes to meltdown.
Then the pumps started to cavitate.
Cavitate?
To vibrate, shake.
Which pumps?
The main primary pumps that push the water through the core. They're the size of a truck. They'd hardly fit in this room. So when they began to shake...
This is just like the China Syndrome.
China Syndrome?
The movie. Remember those huge vibrating pumps that rattled Jack Lemmon?
The movie had it right.
Yes, and do you know something? A manager at the plant had just seen that movie.
So he should have known what to do.
The main primary pumps that push the water through the core started to cavitate.
Must have been steam bubbles getting in and making them knock. They could do a lot of damage in that condition. If the seals broke, then there'd really be a leak, a loca, and we didn't want that.
So what did you do?
We shut them down, 2 out of the 4, and as we were trained to. We still had 2 left.
1 hour, 14 minutes into the accident. 2 hours, 8 minutes to meltdown.
So then the other 2 pumps started shaking. We shut them down too.
Had you ever had to shut down vibrating pumps before?
No, sir.
The procedures were clear?
Well, I weren't much of a guide. To be honest, no real details of what to look for or anything. But really, the things that we were dealing with on this day were different than all other days.
So you were doing something you'd never done before under procedures which weren't clear?
Yes, sir.
While those pumps were still running, they were holding the day, holding off real damage.
Forcing enough water and steam through the core.
Keeping it more or less covered and just cool enough.
Now with these pumps off, there's no water going in or moving around the core.
The core heats up, steam rises and forms pockets.
The water level drops down toward the core.
More heat, more steam, more water boiling away until...
The core starts to uncover, turning steam into superheated steam.
The fuel rods react with the superheated steam. They swell and rupture and start disintegrating, producing hydrogen and releasing radioactive gases.
Hydrogen and radioactive gases get into the water and roll out the pore.
And we're 2 hours into the accident.
Hot legs? What were you looking for?
The difference in temperature between the hot leg pipes coming out of the core and the cold legs going in. That tells you if you've got circulation.
What did you find?
The hot legs were hot.
How hot?
Well, the gauge was all the way off scale on the high end.
What did that mean?
Well, it meant hot. There must have been steam trapped in there.
Was this serious?
Well, you see, there were a lot of unusual things going on, but it did all seem to point to some steam leak or something, as I said before. So we just kept at it, trying to bring things back to normal.
They weren't trained to analyze,
To look at these hot temperatures and deduce that they had superheated steam in the primary.
which you only get
When the core uncovers. Superheated steam, it's the only way. It's a unique sign.
and there was superheated steam,
And they weren't picking that up.
and the top of the core was uncovered,
And they weren't picking that up.
and there's no circulation,
And they weren't picking that up.
and around the core water's boiling away,
And 30,000 gallons has leaked out of the reactor.
and the fuel's disintegrating, and radioactive gases and hydrogens accumulating.
And it's 2 hours and 22 minutes into the accident.
And it's 60 minutes to an irreversible meltdown when
The next shift starts coming in early.
We, of course, intended to stay through the next shift to help.
Of course.
One of the guys on the next shift said it was a pretty frightening sight walking into something like this. Guess he was right.
Anyway, he started walking around checking things over, and he noticed that the Porv discharge temperature was high.
Always was, that leaking Porv. So he says, better close it off. And he pushes the RCV2 back up and closes the Porv backup valve.
Hallelujah, they shut the Porv.
the Porv is closed, the locus stopped.
This could signal the end of the accident.
If they realize what's been happening, that they've had a bad loca, a stuck, open-wide Porv, not just a leaky one.
If they realize. Because even now, although the countdown's on hold, there are still other equally dangerous aspects progressing.
We said, yeah, there it is. We said, look at that. Water level's going down, primary pressure's back up.
You mean you'd found the problem?
Well, we realized we had a loss through the Porv.
For how long?
More than a few minutes, long enough to cause a problem. We lost some water, that was it.
But now things look better. Look like we were heading back to normal.
Heading back to normal?
Well, the symptoms are improving, true.
But none of the operators thinks to ask the really important question. Just how much water was lost out of that Porv?
They don't diagnose the depths of the problem.
By closing the Porv, they seem to have shut out even the idea they could have lost a lot of water.
Reacting to the symptoms, not looking deeper for the cause. When deep at the core, there's not enough water.
And what water there is boiling away, while the core is still disintegrating and hydrogen's building.
Parts of the core may now be melting.
And the operators have no conception of what is happening. When?
6:30 it was, 2.5 hours after it all began.
Radiation's going up. We get a call, 600 million a sample line, and we're getting the hell out.
By 6:45, the roof had caved in.
Radiation alarms everywhere.
All hell was breaking loose.
Oh my God, I said. We're failing fuel. Hey, we're moving into emergency. This is the real thing, the biggie.
Then we declared a site emergency.
A slight emergency?
A site emergency.
Site emergency.
Well, what is happening?
The 12-foot-high, 100-ton radioactive core is half uncovered. Part is melted. The rest is disintegrating, pouring out radioactive gases and debris into the steam and boiling water. The water is 350 times its normal radioactive level. It's this water which, at last, sets off the radiation alarms.
In other words, the nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island, Unit 2, is in a very dangerous condition.
Then at 7:30, I said, Jesus, we've got a dome reading of 10,000 rem in the containment.
Now that could kill someone in 4 minutes. My goodness, I said, how could that be correct?
Well, of course it couldn't. That reading must have been wrong.
But we had to declare a general emergency because of all that radiation.
Had you ever been through a general emergency before?
No, this was the first, I think. The first ever in the country.
I see. Now, this is 3 hours into the accident. Haven't you got backup people, management people?
The control room's getting quite crowded now. Management, manufacturers, reps have arrived in force. They're going to be making the decisions now.
When did you arrive?
Just after 7 a.m.
What did you do?
I took control. We had an emergency.
Now, you had to alert the state and federal authorities, didn't you?
Of course. I followed procedures. I called the state, told them the present status of the plant, that we'd had a transient and some radiation.
But he doesn't tell them that the pore had been stuck open and that the emergency water had been cut.
Well, they didn't ask, did they? He didn't want to volunteer information. He didn't want to scare anyone.
And I called the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, regional office, and got their answering service.
Their answering service? One of those machines that bleep at you?
Their answering service, a voice. They said they'd try to reach someone.
And did they?
About a half hour later.
What did you tell them?
That we'd had a transient and some radiation. Some loss of coolant and apparently some fuel failure.
Good. You've informed the authorities, now you're going to fix the plant. How?
Well, first by trying to get hookups to bypass all the off-scale meters, the hot leg, the core thermocouples, and so on.
Did you?
Yes, we managed to hook up. We found the hot legs up to 790 degrees.
What did that tell you?
That things were hot.
Then we got the core thermocouple readings. They are up to 2,400 degrees. That's hot.
I know that's hot. I'd say that's goddamn hot.
Those were unreliable. Those thermocouples weren't our regular instruments. They were only there for a test.
But we double-checked them and got the same readings. So most of us thought that that was a definite sign that things were worse than we thought. With temperatures that high, the core was definitely uncovered.
Unreliable. Double-checked. What the hell was going on? Didn't anyone know what was going on?
I'd say nobody knew for sure. You don't want to believe this. When you start seeing 3,000, 4,000 degrees in the core, you think you're uncovered. You think meltdown. You don't want to believe this.
Oh, the core was hot, all right. Hot enough to scare me. But those thermocouples, we'd never been trained to use them. They were only there for a test. They must have been damaged.
4 hours in, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. What's the prognosis for the plant?
Dangerous. They're on uncharted ground.
What do you think the operators are feeling?
Frustration.
What do you think they really know of the situation?
It's schizoid. Some don't know anything. A lot know some things, but not enough. Some know a lot, but can't put it all together. Some can put it together, but don't want to believe it. And some might have a pretty shrewd idea of what's going on and aren't talking. But no one seems to know the best way to go.
Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Will you tell us what you were doing at this time?
We received a report from our regional office
What did they tell you?
that there was failed fuel, hot leg temperatures, and so on.
What did you tell your commissioners?
We told them that 3 Mile Island had lost water, apparently uncovered the core, that there was fuel damage, and we didn't know if they'd regained control.
Well, that sounds a lot worse than anybody had told you.
It was a logical deduction.
A logical deduction. Did you, the staff, and commissioners then discuss evacuation contingencies in light of your logical deduction of an uncovered core and fuel damage?
No, sir.
Why not?
We didn't have enough information.
You didn't raise the question of public danger from an uncovered core and the danger of radioactive releases from a plant not under control?
Not in terms of evacuation contingencies, no, sir. We would need radiation levels of much greater magnitude than we were getting before we would consider that.
Then, of course, it might have been too late.
Mr. Management, at this time you had just spoken to the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania and others about the accident. What did you tell them?
I told them the pore had lifted for a time, so there was a coolant release, that there'd been some fuel failure.
Did you tell them all the emergency equipment came on?
Yes.
Did you tell them that the 12s have been closed?
Well, no.
Did you tell them the emergency water injection was cut off 4 minutes into the accident?
I don't believe so.
Did you tell them that the core could have been uncovered?
I didn't believe that, so I didn't bring it up.
All in all, he gave the impression that all was understood and under control. The plant was stable, and there was very limited fuel failure, which wasn't what he told his boss. For at that time, the plant management called headquarters to tell them what was happening.
Play the tape.
This is part of what he said.
I had no choice but to talk to the lieutenant governor. I said we had some pore lift which released some coolant, not a break or a leak. I just didn't tell them of pressure and temperature changes. I'm just saying it to you. To a nuclear engineer there who knows about fuel, I said, yes, we may have had some fuel leakage. I said, I don't have any indication of melted fuel, may have had fuel leakage, which is not abnormal in the industry. Then that we are in a process of taking the plant to cold shutdown. To be honest with you, we've been assessing the plant. We don't know where the hell the plant was going. The situation we're in is a delicate one. We've been trying to figure out how to cool down in the most expeditious fashion.
We don't know where the hell the plant was going, he told his boss.
He knew there was a bad situation, but he didn't know what to do about it.
And that's not what he told the state.
No.
Communication is a problem.
Even if everyone were communicating.
Organization is a problem.
Even if everyone were organized.
Understanding is a problem.
Even if everyone understood.
And is safety a problem?
That depends on the understanding, the organization, and the communication. Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Would you agree that this plant is now in a condition which had never previously occurred at any commercial power plant in the country?
Yes, that would seem to be correct.
A condition which the NRC had never projected and never analyzed.
It is not possible to anticipate every possible problem. The situation should never have gotten so out of hand.
11:38, Wednesday morning.
Then we realized we weren't getting anywhere. All morning we were pumping water into that system, but it didn't seem to be helping.
So we decided to try the opposite tack.
What was that?
Open the pore, lower the pressure.
Where did your change of tack get you?
We got the pressure down.
The flood tanks come on.
Very little flooded in.
Which meant?
Which meant the core must have been covered. And maybe always was.
Or it could mean that steam is blocking the flood tanks and the core is uncovered.
Or a little of each.
What's the news from the NRC?
Oh, well, they're being quite positive. They're saying that things are looking fairly stable.
On what do they base this information?
On misinformation and on a reluctance to face up to the possibility that it's a bad accident.
When at 1:58 in the afternoon, hydrogen detonates in the containment.
A pressure spike. A sudden jump in pressure, 28 pounds per square inch. Quick, like a couple of heartbeats. I know because I missed those heartbeats. I'd never seen the pressure go so high in the containment. It was impossible. It was so unbelievable that it could have absolutely no significance.
What did you think it was then?
An electrical malfunction. We'd been having a lot of those, so I just dismissed it.
A thud in the control room. That's what I heard. I would characterize it as a thud-type noise.
What did you think that was?
Someone said it sounded like a ventilator damper changing modes. Seemed reasonable to me, so I let it be at that.
The sprays come on, and you need pressure of up to 30 psi for that. Well, I couldn't believe it. So I walked over to the chart and looked at the pressure spike. Up to 30. So it was real. The pressure was real.
What did you conclude?
No one seemed to know. Someone, I think, said something about hydrogen exploding. Well, you only get hydrogen when the core's real damaged. I don't know about that, so we went back with what we were doing.
But it was a hydrogen detonation.
Yes.
All that hydrogen that had built up since the morning, when the core had started disintegrating. The spark set it off.
And that detonation should have been a clear indication that the core had been badly damaged.
That the accident was far more severe than the NRC or the state were being led to believe. In the report here, it says that management, more likely than not, knew about the detonation, despite their failure to recollect knowing about the spike or the spray or having a discussion about a possible hydrogen detonation.
Someone mentioned a hydrogen detonation. Did that cross your mind?
Hydrogen? No. I only heard a thud, the ventilation. And I was just hurrying off then to brief the governor.
If you had thought there had been a hydrogen detonation, hypothetically, at that time, would you have told the governor?
Of course. But I had no reason to suppose that.
Well, if, hypothetically, you had supposed it, would you have brought up evacuation?
I would have wanted to get expert advice on how much hydrogen there was. If there was a lot, I would personally have said we should evacuate, yes.
Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Did you know about the hydrogen burn?
Not for 2 days.
2 days?
Yes, it wasn't until 2 days later that we heard about it.
Did you not have your own inspectors at the plant? Did they not know of the pressure spike in the spray?
They say nobody told them.
What happens now?
About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a few people from the NRC and management become apprehensive about the state of the plant. They admit to a concern that the core might be uncovered. The NRC inquires, but doesn't persist.
Yes, they don't want to take charge, to take responsibility. And the management?
A key manager, despite disagreement with the people at the plant, insists that all actions now proceed on the assumption that the core has been uncovered and that the fuel has been severely damaged.
So there's another change of approach, but at last one which accepts there could be a very serious problem. After 12 hours, perception is catching up a little with reality.
And they hold to this new tack for 3 hours. When?
Now you're trying to start the primary pumps again. The big ones which were cavitating?
Yes, we were doing some adjusting on them, but it was looking promising.
And then we managed to bump the pumps.
Bump the pumps?
Get the pumps to come on.
And they stayed on. We were getting some circulation again.
15 hours and 50 minutes after the accident started, the immediate crisis is over. And just about this time, in a neighborhood theater, the curtain goes up.
On the China syndrome.
And an evening newscaster begins his program.
The first step in a nuclear nightmare. So far as we know at this hour, no worse than that.
But the core is a mess, at least half disintegrated, part melted. Pockets of steam still prevent proper circulation through it, and hydrogen is floating around through the system.
Yes, the plant is more or less stable, but it's hardly yet under firm control. Nevertheless, there's a great wave of relief, almost a feeling of well-being.
And that is Wednesday, the first day of the 3 Mile Island accident. Thursday is a day of calm, of relaxation, a day of adjustment, of recuperation, and of starting to assess what had happened, of catching up on the data. You see, nobody yet knows that this Thursday is merely the day before all the things that should have happened on Wednesday will actually begin to happen. The day before all hell will break loose. The day before the panic. For this is the day when, slowly, realization will seep through to acceptance that the plant at 3 Mile Island is severely damaged. And as the extent of the calamity sinks in, nerves become taut and stretched to the breaking point. And now the NRC gets fully involved, assumes responsibility, and starts making its own mistakes.
On Friday morning, 2 days after the start of the accident, did you calculate there might be a radiation release from 3 Mile Island, a condition serious enough to demand a public evacuation?
That is correct.
Did you then, without checking or confirming, recommend to the governor of Pennsylvania that there be an immediate evacuation from around the plant. A serious step which would certainly cause dislocation, even panic.
Well,
A yes or no is all that is required.
yes, I suppose so.
Did you, within the next half hour, on being told that your calculation was irrelevant, tell the governor that the evacuation was unnecessary and apologize for your staff error?
Yes.
Your system breaks down in panic and your apology for the fiasco is a staff error?
That was the phrase we used, yes.
But it was too late. Thousands were fleeing. Fear was already erupting around 3 Mile Island. Fear that was to slither and jolt around for days to come, doing incalculable psychological damage to the people of the area, and also to the nuclear power industry itself. And then the NRC comes up with their own hydrogen scare, different from and potentially more serious than the hydrogen that had detonated on the Wednesday.
And on this Friday, did you start becoming concerned about a hydrogen buildup around the core which could push the water level down and expose the core again?
Our calculations were showing that there was probably a hydrogen bubble buildup in the reactor. That is correct.
Were you concerned that if the core were exposed again in this way, there could be the possibility of a meltdown?
That could not be ruled out.
And all throughout Saturday, the hydrogen scare mushroomed.
First hydrogen and then oxygen. Together, these two gases could burn with enormously damaging pressure, or even explode, turning 3 Mile Island into an atomic Hindenburg.
Possibly blowing out the plant, releasing tons of radioactivity.
Throughout Saturday, they calculated their percentages of gases.
And they argued how long they had before the danger became dire.
And just at this point, the President of the United States decided to visit 3 Mile Island.
To boost public confidence.
The experts are at loggerheads.
The experts disagree.
The reports give us only an inkling of what that discussion might have been like.
He tells me I'm crazy. He thinks I'd made an error in the calculations. He says we're nuts, and here we are. We got to meet with the President in 5 minutes and tell it like it is.
The President of the United States donned yellow plastic boots and inspected the plant. When he emerged, he spoke of an overriding concern for the health and safety of the people of the area. And only now did all the experts finally agree that the hydrogen bubble couldn't have exploded after all. Only now they agreed there had been a miscalculation. So on the 5th day, the immediate crisis comes to an end. But it still does take more time. Another 30 days yet before the plant eventually is brought to a cold shutdown. And then it will sit there for months and for years filled with radioactive debris. A monument waiting to be made clean.
So far, you have seen a dramatized investigation of the 3 Mile Island accident. Now follows a documentary examination of what has changed in the nuclear system since then. After the accident, the investigation's reports listed the problems revealed by 3 Mile Island. And these problems, it was deemed, would have to be addressed by the whole nuclear industry, so that all plants might achieve the levels of safety at which it was previously supposed they had actually operated. Yet none of the perceived problems, including ambiguous instrument readings, inadequate management, poor control room design, inadequate operator training, lack of accident reporting, inadequate emergency procedures, malfunctioning hardware, a mismanaged regulatory commission, and more, none of these problems was considered incurable. No investigation recommended that any operating nuclear power plant be shut down. True, there were warnings. To prevent nuclear accidents as serious as 3 Mile Island, fundamental changes will be necessary in the organization, procedures, and practices, and above all, in the attitudes of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and to the extent that the institutes we investigated are typical of the nuclear industry. President's Commission. Yet close as it might have come, 3 Mile Island did not melt down, and even if it had, the containment most probably would not have ruptured. Most probably, there would not have been a public health catastrophe. Nevertheless, 3 Mile Island threw the nuclear power industry into a state of shock. How and why did nuclear power in the United States come to such a pass? After World War II, development of nuclear weapons was supervised by the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC. In the 1950s, Congress voted to promote a commercial nuclear power program. This, too, was placed under the AEC. In 1975, plant regulation was separated from weapons development and from commercial promotion under the new Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC. Did the official promotion and the Weapons Association contribute to the problems revealed by 3 Mile Island?
I think a very credible case could be made that the early promoters of nuclear power overstated the case, that they were mesmerized by a source of power that would be too cheap to meter, they said, that they believed their own advertising campaign.
I think that there was just an almost religious belief that the people that built the atomic bomb knew what they were doing, and therefore the skeptics didn't get their day in court.
So the agency grew up with an atmosphere of conducive to secrecy and to the withholding of information, and even to a sense that the withholding of information was in the public interest. In one case, an adverse report on the safety of a reactor in Michigan was stamped administratively confidential and withheld even from the governor until the Congress forced its disclosure.
I believe that there were important people in the Atomic Energy Commission and the NRC who truly believed that the large accidents were so unlikely as to be of little concern or no concern. But there were also important elements in the NRC, and this goes all the way back to the beginning, who were sufficiently concerned to continue trying to improve safety.
What they didn't do, though, was to put in place processes that encouraged the raising of those questions, that encouraged the bringing of safety concerns to higher management levels.
The group that thought that accidents were very, very unlikely had the upper hand.
Meanwhile, on the technical side, America's first nuclear submarine, the Nautilus, was powered by America's first functional nuclear power plant. A pressurized light water reactor, it was a specific and optimal design for a submarine.
We took the Nautilus, a 60-megawatt reactor, and we were so impressed that this nuclear power plant could take us underneath the polar ice caps that we then began to scale it up to 100 megawatts, 500 megawatts, and then 1,000 megawatts without doing the necessary physics analysis of the core. Scaling up nuclear power stations make them more efficient, but they also make them harder to cool, more difficult to manage, and easier to break down. We scaled up the Nautilus thinking we would scale up the profits. Instead, we are now plagued with large technical problems as nuclear power plants simply do not operate as efficiently as we once expected.
Basically, those are the problems that led to the complexity of the design without a commensurate understanding of how to deal with the complexity. So the problems in the balance of plant that was becoming very large became complicated and difficult for human beings to handle from the control room.
What I'm trying to say is that technology by itself is not the culprit. It's the way in which this technology was rushed online before its time.
There was a great eagerness to expand the role of nuclear power in the country, and almost any utility that wanted to have a plant and that signed up to build one with a vendor was given a license with rather little review of their competence to manage the plant.
The attitude before 3 Mile Island certainly in the early 70s, is that the utilities bought nuclear power plants like they were items in a Sears Roebuck catalog.
Whatever the workings of the system were before 3 Mile Island, the accident itself was traumatic. What did 3 Mile Island tell us?
Well, it told me that one should confine faith to religion, but having absolute faith in a technology is foolish, and that you can't take a technology on faith. And it told us that the people that paraded nuclear power as being very safe and very cheap were wrong. They said that 3 Mile Island couldn't happen.
You can either say that we caught the reactor in time, and it shows how rugged these reactors are, or you can say, my God, we came within 30 to 60 minutes of a major catastrophe at that nuclear power station.
Valves leaking that should not have been leaking, and many things like that, which have been raised, are not necessarily directly relevant to the accident at all. It's very clear that with hindsight, we wish that the men that were in the control room had a different perspective and done a different thing.
When you talk about nuclear accidents, you have to realize that we scientists are like children playing with matches. We're almost like children playing with a loaded gun.
Not a single man panicked, not a single man violated his training. Sure, with hindsight, we all wish their training had been different. We wish different parts of the engineering had been understood and passed through. With hindsight, we wished it would have been different.
Many people, like the Pennsylvania Dutch around 3 Mile Island, believed in the government when it said that nuclear power plants cannot crash. And then when a nuclear power plant actually did crash, people felt the trust betrayed. They felt that they had been lied to, or at least deceived, by the glowing statements of the nuclear industry.
After 3 Mile Island and the investigations, findings, and recommendations, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the industry responded. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission put together a 347-item action plan to correct the revealed weaknesses in the system. Many see this action plan and how it has been managed, implemented, and accepted as a crucial test as to whether attitudes in the nuclear system have fundamentally changed.
We have said that we think ours was mostly an attitude problem at NRC. We had grown complacent. We think we've corrected that attitude problem, and we point to the action plan and the intensity of the first several years following the accident to put together that very detailed and systematic approach to correcting the things that have been found to be wrong. And then we point to the discipline of the last several years of continuing to work hard and make sure that that plan is implemented in detail, systematically, to all the different kinds of operating plans.
The plan hasn't yet been fully carried out, and as 3 Mile Island fades in memory and as the remaining items in the plan become the ones that are hardest to do and cost the most money, there's a tendency not to see it all the way through, so it may never achieve the gains that it might have.
The problems that caused the accident at 3 Mile Island, the things that went wrong in that particular accident, have been fixed. They were fixed quickly in the operating plants in the United States.
The immediate faults of the 3 Mile Island accident were fixed, but the action plan as a whole was intended to deal with an array of fundamental weaknesses which could contribute to many other types of accidents. In June 1981, more than 2 years after 3 Mile Island, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's own Office of Inspector and Auditor criticized implementation of the action plan.
They issued a report that said that there were some management difficulties, that these things involved coordination among a lot of different offices, and that the staff resources were not being put on the right things in the right order, and that needed to be corrected. It was a rather stinging report about 1.5 years ago, if I remember correctly.
This Nuclear Regulatory Commission internal report, obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, stated of the NRC, "We do not believe that the existing organizational and management structure can provide the attention to the implementation of the action plan which we believe is necessary." In December 1982, nearly 4 years after 3 Mile Island, a General Accounting Office report stated, "NRC's efforts have lost momentum and significant implementation problems and delays are being experienced.
The implementation of the action plan after 3 Mile Island has been erratic. And the reason for that is twofold. First, there was a realization, it's now 4 years later, that many of the things that were sought after 3 Mile Island were not as necessary or not as urgent. And so some of those have been soft-pedaled. Secondly, the cost of the 3 Mile Island changes in these reactors have amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, often over $100 million per reactor. That's a lot of money. And therefore, the utilities have been very careful to try to do these things in the most economical way, and so it's taken longer than if they had just rushed out and spent a lot of money right away.
But backfitting per se has to always be evaluated in terms of what's the cost and what's the benefit. I'm not against backfitting if you can get big benefits for low costs.
The action plan seeks to restore the levels of safety that the NRC assumed existed in the plants when it gave them licenses. That is, it isn't a change in the fundamental safety standards. In essence, it's a document that says, here's what you have to do in order to become as safe as we thought you were when we first gave you a license.
One example of a delayed action plan backfitting item is the direct water level indicator for a reactor. At TMI, the operators had been misled by their instruments into thinking there was too much water in the reactor, when, in fact, there wasn't enough.
The water level indicator is a very difficult thing to design in such a way that it's meaningful, and in fact, it's questionable as to just how meaningful the water level indicator is.
That, again, is a question of cost cutting. The industry simply is not willing to invest a few thousand more dollars to develop a device which can actually give you the amount of water in a nuclear power vessel.
The answer is that it took some design effort and some research to decide what was a proper level indicator. We thought we had one at TMI. It had a lot of design, not much testing, and it failed. The operators said to the engineers, we don't want another one like that. We want a good one. We now think we know how to put on a good one. We've ordered it to be installed in all the plants in the United States, and they will soon be installed.
4 years after 3 Mile Island, most reactors still do not yet have a direct reading water level indicator. 4 years after 3 Mile Island, requirements for almost 30% of action plan items have not yet been issued by the NRC. Of the items required, almost 25% have not yet been fully implemented by the industry. The chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission told NOVA about a debate within the NRC staff as to, quote, whether or not all of those items need to be done, whether they all buy you an additional increment of safety that would be worth the effort that it takes, end quote.
Back right, hose come down, rods going in. Pressure staying up good, level staying up.
I got auxiliary feed water started. Open the 480 volt breakers to the highest potential panel unit.
Manual safety check. One rod didn't fall, see things down. Yeah, go ahead and change that over.
This is a control room training simulator for the Sequoia plant of the Tennessee Valley Authority. Here, operators train against simulated accident sequences. Such an exact, full-scale training facility as this is still the exception, not the rule in the industry. Yet inadequate operator training was a major aspect of 3 Mile Island, and a major industry response has been to devise criteria for improved operator training. These criteria are being developed by the Institute for Nuclear Power Operations, INPO, a new self-regulatory arm of the industry. Its president is E.P. Wilkinson, who was the first skipper of the nuclear submarine Nautilus.
First of all, it was necessary to have proper training programs for all the personnel involved in operation, maintenance, and support of the plants. We went out to the industry and got copies of all their training programs and picked the best from them, augmented them with our experience to come out with the initial training guidelines for the industry. Over time, we will modify those training guidelines based on job and task analysis of the requirements for each position, and also based on our observations in the plant, our evaluations of the plants, and also based on the problems that occur.
Let's just go ahead and trip the reactor and initiate manual safety injection.
Coming down, Leonard.
Developing new training criteria based on what seemed to be the best in the industry is one thing. Evaluating how good the new criteria might be is another. According to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's action plan, the NRC itself must evaluate new training criteria. But according to the General Accounting Office report, they have not done so. The report says, the NRC is placing great reliance on an industry-sponsored organization, INPO, without adequate oversight of INPO's work.
The NRC is not obligated to accept what we do. We have a common purpose with the NRC to safely operate these plants. They can observe what we do, accept it if they want. If it doesn't meet their standards or requirements, they could take amplifying action on their own. But if it does satisfy their needs, there's no reason they should duplicate it.
We're going to reduce power to 60%.
Pressure really hadn't started up. Take that back, it has started up.
But INPO has not scientifically evaluated its own work. INPO has not done experimental studies of operators in simulated accidents to find out if changes in training have actually improved the operator's ability to control an accident.
I think it's definitely true that the high school graduates that we have operating in nuclear power plants know more now than they did before 3 Mile Island. But my only question is, shouldn't we train nuclear power operators to be like airlines pilots that make perhaps $100,000 a year only to make airplanes safe on the takeoff and the landing, only just a few minutes out of every flight?
Beyond the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's action plan, 3 aspects of nuclear plant safety have come into prominence since 3 Mile Island. The first, affecting over 1/2 of all United States plants, is corrosion and vibrations, which can cause ruptures in steam generators. Already, 4 generators have had to be completely replaced.
A steam generator tube rupture throws the plant into an upset condition, and if anything else were to go wrong at the same time, the steam generator tube rupture would make it harder to bring that combination of events under control. Up to now, however, and probably in the future, its primary significance for the industry has been economic.
The effects of a steam generator tube rupture are now understood better than they were, say, a year or 2 ago. And although what causes the corrosion isn't understood, the effects are now understood, and we believe that the effects are not going to be the rather catastrophic accident that was feared at first.
The replacement of a steam generator, an entire steam generator, can run to hundreds of millions of dollars, so that it's one more area in which the investor and the owning utility worry that they don't really know what the costs are going to be, and they may have to spend a lot of money at some point down the road.
The second safety aspect is embrittlement of reactor vessels due to radiation. Older reactors can become susceptible to cracking under certain temperature and pressure conditions. Almost 1 in every 4 reactors has been identified as perhaps having potential problems of this type, for which preventive measures might have to be taken.
That would be a very serious safety problem if the worst possible scenarios actually happen. That is, a sudden overpressure at the same time that the vessel had been rapidly cooled down could conceivably crack or rupture the pressure vessel, and there are no safety systems adequate to deal with a major rupture of the pressure vessel itself.
It's obviously a potential serious safety problem, but careful analysis has showed that it's not likely to be an important one. I think that the situation requires more study, and it's getting more study.
It's a time bomb that's not going to explode today or tomorrow. But what about 10 years? What about 20 years? These reactors are aging much more rapidly than anyone ever suspected.
A November 1982 Nuclear Regulatory Commission report claims that embrittlement is not an immediate problem and that it can be taken care of. But critics point out that this study seemed to obscure data suggesting that Babcock and Wilcox plants, like the 3 Mile Island reactor, could be more urgently susceptible.
It is true that we used information that tended to average all of the pressurized water reactors in the United States, and that Babcock and Wilcox was treated as if it were like some other plants, when in fact there are differences. That was a preliminary report, you have to bear in mind, and we used the information we had, the studies that had been done so far, to try to draw general conclusions. One of the conclusions was we had to look hard at the B&W plants as a special class, and that's exactly what we're doing today, is trying to understand whether something more needs to be done because they are different than the average.
The third safety aspect is positive. It addresses a key question. Has the public danger from a worst-case accident always been greatly overestimated? Industry studies since 3 Mile Island claim that the computer-calculated releases of dangerous radioactivity from a worst accident would be 10, 100, even 1,000 times smaller than previously claimed.
The danger zones are significantly less than previously thought. Instead of being tens of miles out to 50 miles, I think we're talking whether it's a half a mile or a quarter of a mile or 3/4 of a mile, depends to some extent on local geography.
Until we've done more study, I can't myself be confident that the whole thing's going to come out saying reactors are much safer than they were before.
The computer codes generally in use do not at all predict what really happens. They always overpredict and have for years. And what I'm going by is the rather old-fashioned basic rules of chemistry and physics and gravity, which a computer can leave out, but the physical world can't. TMI was not a meltdown. There have been actual meltdowns. There have been many military accidents, weapons accidents, many, many things. It's not bench chemistry. It's big scale.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission did a study, NUREG 0772, to review the industry claims of over-prediction of accident dangers. It found their case not yet proven.
I disagree with it. A number of other technical groups around the world disagree. 0772 was a very quick look at which they reused the same computer codes they had used previously and gotten the same answer. Since 0772, the NRC has had a very extensive program and have agreed, I think now, that all of the accidents of any type were overestimated.
The chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission told NOVA that while there were these industry assertions, quote, until we have enough data to evaluate them, we are not in a position to say they are true or not true, end quote. How safe, then, is safe? According to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in January 1983, if a probability calculation shows that a plant has a less than 1 in 10,000 chance of meltdown during any 1 year, it is safe enough.
If you look at 1 chance in 10,000 reactor years of operation, that appears to make it seem as if we will never see a nuclear accident. But that hides the fact that we have 72 reactors. In other words, every year we would have approximately a 1% chance of a meltdown. In 10 years, we would have roughly a 10% chance of a meltdown. And by the year 2000, we would have a 20% chance of a nuclear accident.
Well, when you consider that the meltdown is not something that's automatically of danger to the public, and in fact maybe only 1 in 100 meltdowns would lead to something that's dangerous to the public, and you put that factor in there, I'm very comfortable. It makes nuclear power safer than any other way of generating electricity.
And I simply cannot tolerate those odds. And I would even challenge those odds. I would say that Jimmy the Greek could probably give you more realistic odds than the odds coming from the nuclear industry and the NRC.
Well, I think we can live with 1 in 10,000, yes, indeed.
think the new initiative on safety goals is a very important one, because the NRC is now telling people, although the policy statement hasn't been completed, they're telling people for the first time how safe they think reactors ought to be. The point being that if a reactor can meet this safety goal, then it's safe enough.
It is a real invitation to mischief because it can be used to put aside the raising of safety concerns by the NRC's engineers on the basis that the plants are safe enough already, that they meet this goal, and therefore even relatively inexpensive improvements need not be made.
Whatever the arguments about safety, the reality of nuclear power is that since 1978, no new nuclear power plants have been ordered. 56 have been canceled. In the same period, new coal plants, equivalent to 24 nuclear plants, have been ordered.
The main reason why plants are not being ordered today is that the cost of them has become so high that investors, Wall Street investors, and the utility executives are not ordering the plants.
The utility cannot know for sure what the final cost will be, just as we still don't know the final cost of the Browns Ferry plant that we built 10, 15 years ago. Therefore, if you're figuring out whether to make the investment, you know it's going to be high, but you just don't know how high.
Today we have plants that are very expensive because in some cases they have 35 layers of Band-Aids on a cut that wasn't even there. And somehow we have to find a way to get technical assessment of the safety, not emotional assessment.
Since 3 Mile Island, the public's reaction to the safety concerns is very real, that it's not going away, and that their product is failing to meet the acid test in our society, that is the market test.
I think the words of David Lilienthal, the first chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, were very prophetic when he said that perhaps we should go to the drawing board. Perhaps we should be humble. Perhaps we should admit that we were arrogant, that scientists were arrogant of this technology. Perhaps we should go back to the drawing board and reassess light water technology.
We know that this reactor design has flaws in it. I really don't believe that it makes sense to subject operators to turning 50,000 valves as they have to at our Browns Ferry plant. We can come up with simpler design.
There is a danger period of perhaps 20 years where this country will be perhaps in jeopardy of losing its oil supplies. But I would say that the nuclear option is simply not a viable option. It's not a viable option economically, physically, and technically. Basically, it's an unnecessary technology because we have alternate forms of energy. By conservation and by use of solar power, we can bridge this 20-year danger period until we have an economical dependence on inexhaustible forms of energy.
There are only two fuels which we have that are available for expanding our generation of electricity: coal and nuclear energy. We wouldn't want to put all our eggs in one basket if we could, but it's probable that we can't put all our eggs in the coal basket just from the point of view of mining it, moving it, and the environmental effects. So we have to have a mix of coal and nuclear power.
Coal plants kill perhaps 10,000 people a year, more than are killed from nuclear power stations. So it is a very heavy choice this country must make, whether it should go into coal.
That trade-off is a political judgment. Both are nasty, and I sure wish we didn't have to have too much more of either.
Well, I'm convinced that nuclear power plants can be built and operated safely if we do our job well. I think we've redoubled our efforts since 3 Mile Island, and we know how to do our job well. I think it would be a mistake for the United States at this point in time to forego that option.
You know, the critics of nuclear power on the extreme want to see it die. The industry people say it's the greatest thing since ice cream. I think the public interest lies in between, in a better nuclear product, not because nuclear power is anything great in and of itself, but because it will displace alternatives that are worse.
The material on this video cassette is protected by copyright. It is for private use only, and any other use, including copying, reproducing, or performance in public, in whole or in part, is prohibited by law.